Well, if you've ever had the thought, why am I so double minded when it comes to decluttering? One day I'm ready to get rid of everything, and the next I can't seem to part with any of it. I'm really glad to get to visit with Natalie Hoffman from Flying Free. She is an author, a podcast host, creator of the Flying Free community. She also has a new book out that we're going to talk about. But Natalie, I followed you for quite a while, and you're very skilled at helping us unravel and sort out these conflicting thoughts that many of us feel, not only when it comes to decluttering, but it really applies to other areas of our life. But I'm excited for you to help us navigate this when it comes to decluttering, because I hear from so many women that they'll like watch one of my YouTube videos and they're like, I'm all fired up. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to get rid of all my stuff. I know the benefits. It's going to help me. But when they really get into it, all these thoughts come in about, but that's wasteful and you should keep that. And somebody gave that to you. What are they going to think?
I recently wrote a book about this to kind of show people what it is. But you're right. If you've ever had the thought, like, part of me really wants to do this and believes this, and then another part of me really wants to do that. And sometimes it's the exact opposite. And so you feel like you've got this food fight going on internally. Or if you've ever thought, I wonder why, I feel like I'm this kind of a person, but whenever I find myself in this particular environment, I show up in a way that's not really aligned with who I am. And I wonder, like, who is this weird person that's showing up right now?
Yes.
We sometimes can experience that if we go to maybe a class reunion or something like that. And all of a sudden, we're back in our teenage body and feeling like a teenager and maybe feeling those same insecurities that we had. Or like if you go home for the holidays and you're with your family again, and all of a sudden you feel like you're that 12-year-old kid who's trying to navigate the weird, dynamic in your
Yeah.
family,
Mm-hmm.
especially if there's a little bit of dysfunction, which I think there probably is in most of our
Yeah.
families. So then we can wonder, like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just be me? And who am I anyway?
And Natalie, don't you think too, we often assume that nobody else is having these like struggles or these challenges, or like it's clear, it's obviously just me because I don't actually hear most other people talking about it.
Exactly. We don't talk about it. And one thing I've heard when I started talking about it, for me, a lot of people came out of the woodwork and were like, "Yeah, I totally feel like that." Like one thing I've always felt like is I feel like I'm such a kid, or like I'm
Mm.
playing house. Like
Yes.
even when I got married, I was old enough to get married, and I was, 25 when I got married. And by the time I was having kids in my early 30s, I still felt like, what am I doing? I have a house, I have these kids, I'm trying to manage my life, and I still feel like I'm 16 years old. Am I just pretending? How come all my other friends look like adults managing their lives, and I just feel like a teenager and I can't get it together?
I am so glad you said that. I actually mentioned that on a recent YouTube video, and I was talking about kind of like organizing and stuff. And I'm like, often I just feel like, yeah, like when you were a little kid, even, and you were setting up house when you were going to play house, I was just like, it just like, and especially when we had baby stuff and you had all the little baby clothes and the baby things, and you're like, straightening it all up. And I could not believe how many women on that video said, wow, I totally like feel the exact same way.
Yeah, yeah. Why don't we talk about it? I think we don't want people to know that we have those insecurities, I guess.
So what have you learned about this now as you've studied it more and come across other resources?
So a few years ago, I came across this thing called IFS. It stands for Internal Family Systems. And it wasn't really a very well-known kind of therapy tool, but it has exploded in the last couple of years. And now there are lots of books being written about it. And there are podcasts popping up all over the place about it. And whereas 5 years ago, I would mention it to the therapist that my kids or I were working with, and they had never heard of it. Now a lot of therapists and counselors know about it, and it's becoming a thing. And a lot of people are getting trained in how to use it. Not just therapists, but also coaches are getting trained in how to use it. I think it'd be easier if I just read a quote from my book,
Mhm.
because it explains it in more of a succinct way, because it's kind of it's a big thing, and it can feel complicated, but it's really not. It's IFS stands for Internal Family Systems Theory, and it's a way of looking at ourselves that recognizes that we each have different parts inside of us. And those parts have their own beliefs or programming based on our life experiences. So some parts of us are called manager parts, And they try to prevent pain by working hard to manage the circumstances and the people in our lives. And they might try to do this by trying to please people or control people or manage other people's emotions or judge people and so on. And these manager parts of us might think, for example, that if only we could make people like us or do what we want them to do, then we would be happy and we would avoid pain. Now, other parts of us, so that's one part. These other parts called firefighter parts, and they will spring into action if our manager parts are unsuccessful at preventing pain. So these firefighter parts will attempt to put out the fire of the pain to make it go away. And they might do this by overeating or over drinking, overspending, self harming, or using drugs. These parts of us believe immediate relief is the answer and that we have to do whatever it takes to make the pain go away. They don't understand that some of the methods that we use to get that immediate relief often lead to long term damage. So, when I was trying to explain this to my kids in a way that they could understand, I gave them this analogy. Imagine that your life is a bus, and in the front of the bus is ourself. And we drive the bus through life wherever we want to go. And our core self is now, I come from a Christian faith, so I talk to my kids in terms of that, but our core self is interconnected with God or source or our creator, and it's whole and complete and resourced. And God didn't put us, ourself, in charge of anyone else's bus, just our own. So we are the driver and we are connected and at one with our creator. But there are other parts of us on the bus too. So, sitting over here on this side of the bus are our manager parts with all of their ideas and thoughts about how to manage our lives in order to prevent pain. And on the other side of the bus are our firefighter parts, ready to fly into action as soon as we feel negative emotions. And way in the back seats of the bus are our exiled parts. And I think of them as these younger versions of us, these little children versions of us hiding and maybe curled up in the fetal position. And these parts of us carry all of our pain, our past trauma, and our confusion. We might acquire exiles from being bullied in school or getting lost in a shopping mall or losing a friend in an accident or going through a natural disaster, maybe having a hard time finding friends. Maybe you grew up poor or grew up in an overly strict home or had a parent with a mental health issue or substance abuse problem or anything else that would cause us harm or emotional pain. But here's the thing, the parts on our bus sometimes disagree with each other about the best course of action. They judge each other and they
Yeah.
fight.
Yeah.
And I used to think there was something wrong with me because I had all these opposing thoughts dictating orders and I couldn't figure out which ones I was supposed to obey. I
Yeah.
saw them as like scary little gods in my life, shouting orders and threatening me if I didn't do everything, right. But now, when I feel particularly chaotic in my brain and body, now because of my learning about IFS, I'm aware of what's going on inside of me. And I'm no longer afraid of these little parts with all their emotions. When I'm feeling that, dysregulation inside of me, I can think, oh, my parts are having a food fight on my bus right now. And that's when I just wanna slow it down and tune in and listen to what each individual part is trying to communicate to me. I'm not listening to something outside of myself, I'm just listening to my own beliefs and my inner thoughts. If I don't stop to listen, I'm never gonna know what's going on inside of me, and then I'm not gonna have the self-awareness that I need to address the issues I'm struggling with.
Yeah, no, I love this explanation because I think, and to say like this is very normal, right? This is like everybody has this. Now we have varying degrees of exiled parts and different firefighters that might come in, but I think for many of us, this is. I hope women listening, if you're not familiar with this, you're like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense, right? That it is very normal that you've had all these different conflicting emotions and thoughts and feelings, how one day I can be so resolved about something and then the next I am like questioning everything and I'm just totally flip-flopped to the other way.
Yes. Well, and one thing we need to know about ourselves and how our brain works is that our brain wants to keep things status quo. because
Mm.
that feels comfortable.
Yeah.
So if we're in a place in our lives, even if we're used to chaos, that's the thing. We can look at each ourselves or other people and we can go, how can they live like that? That's so chaotic.
Mhm.
No, well, to them, it might feel very normal and comfortable and safe. And so, of course, we can understand why that part of us would want to keep things status quo and maybe not. You might think, in terms of decluttering, you might think, oh, well, it would be so much better and our life would be so much better if we had a nice clean home and we knew where everything was and we didn't have all of this excess. No, there's a part of us inside that might really feel very safe and secure in the way that it is. And
Yes.
that instead of fighting that part and shaming it and beating it up, what if we actually were able to understand,
Yeah.
empathetically understand where that part is coming from and why that part feels so safe in that kind of chaos? That's really the only way that inner healing is the only way that we're going to be able to actually make some really deep, maybe not just even aesthetic progress in our lives, but really deep inner progress in our lives.
I love that. So walk us through practically then. Okay, so to the woman who is feeling like I know, like logically I know if my house is simplified and decluttered, it's going to be easier to clean, it's going to feel more peaceful, my family is going to benefit from that. So okay, I know that. I want that. I watch the videos. I've tried many times to do this. Yet I have this part coming in. Maybe it has like some scarcity mindset into it of like, but what if we can't replace that? Maybe I also have this thought coming in of, well, you can do that, but it's never stuck before. Like, nice try, trying to get decluttered, but like you're just going to buy the stuff again and clutter it back up. And then your spouse is going to give you a hard time. Your kids are going to think you're being foolish. And another part, maybe that comes in saying, like, well, I'm not a good steward. Like, I want to be a good steward of all of my things and be very financially responsible. And if I'm just willy nilly getting rid of things, like, that's not being a good steward. So how do we start to unravel this?
When you come up with a reason or what you might call as an excuse for not doing something,
Mhm.
instead of fighting that, or usually what we'll do is we'll think that thing and then we'll just shut down.
Mhm.
We just shut down and then we go, eat some chips.
Yes.
But instead of doing that, what if you could actually sit and listen to what that part is trying to tell you? Why that part doesn't want it. So what I recommend is doing a thought download.
Mm.
And you can I've actually seen you recommend, like setting a timer for 5 minutes
Mhm.
to, clean up a small area and just see what you can get done in 5 minutes. So I love that hack, that brain hack, because our brains will go, oh my gosh, I don't want to sit. I don't have time to do a thought download. I don't want to sit there and write for, who knows how long. And what if I start writing and I can't stop? Plus it's uncomfortable sometimes to go into our thinking. So just tell yourself, okay, self, we're just going to do it for 5 minutes. That's it. So set your timer and sit down and write down all of the things that are coming up for you when you have the thought, I really need to declutter my kitchen cupboards, for example. Well, I don't want to give up this particular, appliance because my mother used it the whole time I was growing up. She makes cream kakas with it. And I know I've never made a cream kaka in my life and I don't ever want to, but I really need to hang on to this
Yeah.
cream kaka machine. And it means so much to me. And it reminds me of my mother, and that reminds me of my grandmother, and that reminds me of my heritage. And oh my word, I'm not even living up to my heritage, and I'm never going to pass on my Norwegian heritage to my grandchildren. And just write it all down and get it all out. And
Yeah.
then read it back to yourself, like empathetically listen, the way you would listen to a little child who's pouring out their concerns. And when you listen with this heart of compassion and curiosity and understanding, you create this shift inside of yourself where that part of you feels heard. There's definitely there's this little bit of release, like relief, like, oh, finally, someone gets it. Then what you can do, once you've got that relief that someone gets it, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but when your child really senses that you're listening to them, now they're more open to hearing other suggestions. They're more
Yeah.
open to loosening up their own thinking, maybe not switching it entirely. They're
Mhm.
maybe not going to be able to, you're maybe not going to be able to go from, you know, I will never pass on my Norwegian heritage to it's okay. I'm just fine without doing that. Like you might not be able to go to the opposite extreme, but you might be able to loosen up your thinking to think maybe thoughts like, what if we could pass on our Norwegian heritage in other ways? Maybe there's a way we could hang on to this, like, by taking a picture of it and posting some pictures and doing a little, montage of the item and maybe some what cream kakas look like, and then teaching our kids about how, this was the cream kaka machine that your great grandmother used. This is what a cream kaka looks like, and then buy them at the store.
Yeah, I was like, "And this is
Yeah,
the bakery we go to buy them because I will never make it, and
exactly.
that's fine." And
Exactly, and it could be something that you only do at Christmas time.
yeah.
I don't know, but you would never come to that creative solution
Yes.
if you didn't actually look at, why is this item so important to me? That's how I do it inside of me and how I teach other people to do it inside of them. I don't work with women on decluttering, but
Yes.
I can definitely see how, I mean, IFS can be used in any challenge that you have in your life. And I think our homes, when it comes to our homes and maintaining peace and orderliness and just a sense of calmness and safety in our homes is, well, and also, I mean, I think about my home. I feel like our homes reflect what's going on inside of us. So oftentimes when I look around me and I see I've really let my office go to the pits, it doesn't always mean that I'm busy.
Sure.
It could mean that I'm feeling really scattered and I'm not
Yeah.
really addressing some of my deeper issues. And it really has nothing to do with my ability to clean up my office. I know I can clean up my office. I could even hire someone to clean up my office. It has to do with what's going on inside of me, and that's what's most important for us anyways. What's happening inside of us? How are we how are we taking good care of the person who has our name?
Yeah.
That's what's important.
Yeah. That's so good. And I think this is really encouraging. And I mean, what if it's something that, I mean, even deeper, that it's something like, I make poor decisions. I mess everything up. Is this something that we can work through by ourselves? Is it something we're going to have to keep journaling about or writing about frequently? Or for some of these like really deep seated things, how do we apply this?
Yeah. I mean, there's always these core beliefs that we have, but they usually come up in like a current circumstance. So you may have a core belief that, like, I learned that I had this core belief, there is something fundamentally wrong with me. But it came up in other thoughts, like there are surface thoughts, and then underneath those there are deeper thoughts, and then underneath those, and if you keep oftentimes the way to find out what your core belief is in anything is to keep asking yourself why. When you have a thought, just go, "Well, why?" And how we can do that is, again, if we write our surface thoughts down on paper by doing a thought download, that's when we can actually look at them objectively. Sometimes if our thoughts about something, like, let's say, I mean, do you wanna give me a circumstance?
Well, I'm thinking, tying it into decluttering. I know many women kind of freeze when they actually get like they're standing in front of their closet. They want to declutter their clothes. They're looking at things that are four sizes too small, things that are way too dressy for anything they would wear right now. So they walk up to their closet feeling resolved. I'm getting rid of all of the stuff I have not worn in a year. But now I actually go to pull it out and I don't trust myself to make that decision because I feel like I make poor decisions. I'm going to declutter it and then I'm going to decide that I actually did want it. And so now I just totally second guess and question myself, and therefore I don't make the decision, and I just
Yeah,
leave it there.
yeah. Well, okay, so that could go back to, there's something fundamentally wrong with me just in thinking that I'll make a mistake.
Mhm.
Like, that would be more of a surface. Well, what if I make a mistake and I get rid of something and then I realize later that I really needed that for something?
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think that a lot when I'm looking at my closet,
Okay.
especially. And then if you look under that, well, why, I would ask myself, well, why is that a problem? First of all, before I get into that though, I would say, when you're looking at your closet, get your notebook and go through, and when our thoughts are swirling around in our head,
Mhm.
and by the way, 90 it's over 9 I can't remember the exact number, but it's over 90% of our thoughts are non-conscious.
Yeah.
They're under the surface where we can't access them. We
Mhm.
usually only access just a small percentage of our thoughts. So if you want to gain more self-awareness, you have to be willing to go down there and dig into non-conscious thoughts. And so you're having probably hundreds of thoughts while you're looking at your closet, and you don't, and there most of them are non-conscious.
Okay.
So if you want to bring them to your surface, I would say grab a notebook and look through your clothes and write down what you're thinking.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh my word, that is a suit jacket that I bought that I never wore, but I thought I would wear it when I was gonna be a teacher. But you never know, I might need it for an interview, or I might need it to speak at something, but I've never worn it in literally 15 years.
Right.
So, but I write down, well, I'm afraid to give it up because it would cost a lot of money. It's a classic piece. What if I you never know, I might, but it doesn't even fit, but
Yes.
I might lose weight someday. Like,
Yes.
and you just answer all of the
Yeah.
objections, and I don't want to, and then, so why is that a problem for you? Why is it a problem that you would get rid of it, or that you would, and just keep asking why. And you'll end up getting down to, well, if I make a mistake, then that means there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
That means I'm not a good person. That means I don't make good decisions. That means I'm not. Those are the underlying core thoughts that we have about ourselves. That's when you can stop and go, what if you did make a mistake? What if you made a mistake? Let's just go there. I always tell my clients, let's go there. Let's say that you made a mistake and you got rid of that thing that doesn't fit you, that was expensive and it's really nice. It's in perfect shape because no one ever wore it. What if you made a mistake and got rid of it? And then 2 years from now, you really needed it for something and you lost the weight and it could have fit and it would have looked amazing. What then?
Yeah.
And you go, and all of a sudden, and then your logical brain will kick into gear and go, well, I suppose I would just find something else, or maybe I'd go out and buy something that's maybe a little more, you know, date that's maybe more in vogue now instead of what
Yes.
was in vogue 15 years ago. Yeah. So anyway, and then that kind of solves your problem a little
Yes,
bit.
because there was a therapist we used to have on the radio with us, and he would say, "Imagine the worst case scenario." Most often then you're like, "Oh, great. So I have to go out and I'll go to a thrift store and I will look for another one or I'll borrow one from a friend." And what's so fascinating, I think about like what you're saying is like taking that head on is that's swirling around our mind anyways, right? We're just not pinning it down. It's out there floating
Yes.
around and undermining all of our decisions, but we're not willing to just take it head on and say, okay, worst case scenario, I make a mistake and I declutter a $100 suit jacket and then I need it again. What will I do? And I love that. And being honest enough to say, and I'm afraid that someone in my household might call me stupid or they might make fun of me or tell me they might reinforce that I make poor decisions. That's kind of a separate thing, right? That we might have to start to work through, but it actually doesn't have a whole lot to do with the actual suit jacket that's cluttering up my closet.
Right. Well, and I think even along those lines, when we are worried about other people and what they might think about us, underneath that is our fear that that person is right about us. Once we really connect with those little parts of us that have these fears or that we feel shame about, and we learn how to love them, then when other people criticize us or don't like what we've done or don't like the decisions that we've made, we already are so in love with these little parts inside of us that we will be protective of them, and that
Yeah.
we'll be like, it's okay, you don't need to feel shame. They
Mhm.
have their opinion,
Yeah.
probably because their little parts are activated and they're trying to
Right.
manage their life,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
And but they can have their opinion. Let's give them permission to have their opinion about me, but I am going to hold so much loving space for who I am, and we're human and we get to make mistakes. That is part of the privilege and the opportunity of being a human. We get to go out there and make choices and decisions every day of our lives, and it's going to be like Miss Frizzle. Did you ever see Magic School Bus? The Frizz?
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yep.
Frizz always said, "Let's get messy and make mistakes." And we get to do that. We get to get messy and we get to make mistakes, and that's part of the beauty of being human.
And I love Natalie in your new book, All the Scary Little Gods. You so in the second part of the book, you actually it's a memoir and you write out what all these different parts are saying to you through the same set of circumstances. And it was so good to read because it really helped this idea that IFS to really click, and I could resonate with so much of the different parts that you were writing about. So, do you want to tell us a little bit? And it is a faith based book, but will you tell us a little bit about your book?
Sure. Well, it's a memoir, but I wanted it to be more. than just my story. I really want, in English class in high school, how the English teacher would always say, show, don't tell.
Yes.
So I tend to be more of a writer that likes to tell. I like to write nonfiction books. And I thought with this one, I wanted to write my story, but I wanted to show a pathway to inner healing through my own journey. So I broke my book into 4 parts. And the first part of my book, I let little Natalie tell the story. So I had to go through my own healing journey and heal my relationship with my younger self because I really viewed my little Natalie, my younger self, as being stupid, ugly, duckling kind of a I was ashamed of her. And there was some trauma in my life. And so I needed to heal my connection with that little Natalie. So I did that. And then I thought, I'm going to just let her tell the first part of my story from her perspective. And so it's this creative little and what I did too with my book is I did short little chapters. So it's a big book. It's almost 400 pages long, but it's like would you rather eat a big baked potato full of stuff or would you rather sit down and eat a bag of potato chips? So each chapter is like a potato chip. And you just, how when you eat a potato chip, you just eat
Just
one
want one
little
more.
potato chip. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
just want one more. So I
Yes.
I wanted my book to be like, oh, I just want to read just one more chapter. So I think it has 89 chapters, but they're really short and each one, I really wanted to make each one like be really power packed and have some kind of like little light bulb moment in each one so that people would get that like dopamine hit. And then they'd be like, oh, I just want just one more
That
chapter. So
perfectly just that's exactly how I felt going through it. I think probably because we all have such short attention spans now too. The short chapters were great, but it always left you wanting more. You're like, "Just one more, just one more. No, I need to go to sleep. No, just one more chapter."
yes. So in the Audible version, I actually use a younger voice. I read the Audible version. I use a younger voice for little Natalie. So, and the second part of my book is more in my 20s and 30s and 40s. Actually, more 30s and 40s. And for that part of my book, that's where a lot of really hard things happen. The way I was programmed as a child, I was living out that programming and I had 9 kids. I was homeschooling mom and I was in a destructive marriage. So I decided to have that part of my book. It's kind of a hard part to write. I had all my different parts, right? Not all of them, but I invited several of them to write. So, like, for example, there was a part of me, I call her Rosie. Everything was awesome. So she writes her perspective. So each little section tells a little story from that part of my life, but it tells it from the perspectives of all these different parts.
Yeah.
How did Rosie think about this? How did I had this part freaked, constantly freaking out. The sky was always falling for this part of me. Another part of me was I call that part melancholy. And everything was I was just beating myself up. You're such a terrible person, you're such a loser, you're such a this, that, and the other thing. So that's melancholy. And then I have this part called rude. Rude is my truth teller. And rude is kind of rude. She just would
Snarky.
always,
Yeah.
a little bit snarky.
Yeah.
Exactly. So she would always I let her, share her thoughts. And actually that part of my book, I took from my journals. And I could see these different parts of me actually writing different things in my journals. And that's why I thought what am I, schizophrenic or something? Why
Yeah,
can I
did you
think?
actually wonder that when you were living this out, like, if there was something wrong with you?
Yeah, I wondered, like, why does part of me think my life is so amazing? And then another part of me is like, my life is so hard and so overwhelming. How can you have those two thoughts at the same time? I really didn't know until I had, grew up and learned all this other stuff. But I really wanted women to be able to have more compassion on themselves
Right.
and
Yeah.
understand where all these, thoughts are coming from and to be okay with them. I don't have to shame Freaked just because she's always freaking out. I used to feel a lot of shame around Freaked. I'd be like, why do you have to be such a freak out? I mean, a drama queen. Like, why can't you just settle down? No, that was a part of me. Oh, and there's another part of me, I call her spiritualizer, which is actually a term coined by Jenna Ramiersma in her book Altogether You. But spiritualizer, I came from a Christian background. So spiritualizer had to put a Christian spin on everything, like a biblical spin on
Yeah.
everything. And so she talks like this and she has all the answers and she just is going to slap the Bible verse on everything. And so she's a lot of fun too. She shows up a lot in my journals. And then parts 3
Yeah.
and 4 is just me talking and sharing about really sharing about the healing journey then, how I ended up getting out of how I ended up connecting with those different parts of me and learning how to love myself, learning how to and when I started learning how to love myself, my compassion, all of my judgment about everybody else just melted away.
Isn't
My
that funny?
compassion for
Mm.
other people started to increase. So, from a Christian standpoint, I believed in loving other people and, supporting one another and encouraging one another, and yet there's so much there in my circles that I ran in, there was so much judgment of each other and so much shame and fear. I was trying to deprogram from really kind of pandering after and placating and fawning after these scary little gods to realize that God was actually so much bigger than that and has so much love for us and so
Yeah.
much compassion for us and kindness and connected he's so connected to us. And then the last part of my book is how now I became or I am becoming, because it's an ongoing story and it's still messy. It's still very messy. I really tried not I don't believe in wrapping things up in pink bows and then, and riding off into the sunset and everything is because
Yeah.
that's not realistic and
Yeah.
nobody has a life like that.
Yeah.
We all continue to evolve and grow and learn and have challenges. And so I'm really honest about that. And so the last part of my book is just showing so how can we show up with our new program? How do we deprogram from things that are really holding us back and keeping us stuck? And then how do we show up with new thoughts and new ideas and new programming and what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about God, what we believe about other people is going to impact not just our own worlds, but it's going to or our own lives, but it's going to have a ripple effect into how we influence the world around us, including our children, our their partner, their spouses, our friends, our grandchildren, just everyone that we touch in our lives is going to be impacted by the healing work that we do
Yeah.
inside of our own lives.
Well, and I think, I often as Christians, we get kind of conflicting messages of like, well, we shouldn't focus too much on self and it's all about God and it's all about love. But I love what you're saying is that we know we have to be okay with ourselves and love ourselves and that I think it's often been oversimplified and we don't realize that being compassionate and empathetic of these different parts and that's what truly has led to being able to fully love yourself, fully be confident in yourself, and how much that did impact your view of God and your relationship with God and your ability to love others well and not have to judge them and just let them fully be who it is they're going to be. And so it is fascinating to me that often like we're like don't just focus on yourself, but actually no, you do need to do this groundwork before you can like fully show the love of God, I feel like.
Yes, totally. I think some people think, like I always used to hear, and I talk a lot about, my specific beliefs and how they played out. But I think there's this fear that if you love yourself, then you're going to just go and do selfish things. You're
Yeah.
just going to take advantage of everyone and you're going to go have sex with everybody and you're going to do drugs and, become an alcoholic and just drink and you're just
Just
going to
seek
party all
pleasure
the
wherever you
time.
can get it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm like, no, that is completely not true. Those are, in the IFS language, that would be like our manager parts deciding, well, I know, let's just do all of that. And that doesn't show love to ourselves at all. That means that we're having food fights on our bus and we're trying to uh
Escape.
escape. Exactly.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's not deeper healing. That's running away from deeper healing. So I think people who are truly truly doing that work of loving themselves, they're going to there's 8 C words that Richard Schwartz, who is the founder of IFS, I probably should have mentioned him at the very beginning. Now, he doesn't come from a Christian perspective, but Jenna Ramiersma, who wrote the book Altogether You, she does come from a Christian perspective and talks about IFS. So she talks about how these 8 C's are actually they actually coincide with the fruits of the Holy Spirit. But the 8 C's are these. This is how you know that you're connected to self: compassionate, curious, calm, clear, courageous, connected, confident, and creative.
Hmm. Well, and what I love is that often I think as women we can't even imagine that so much for ourselves, but sometimes we can think, "Oh, that would be the characteristics I want my kids to have," right? And sometimes we can want better for them, and we could see it more clearly of how we want it to play out in their own lives than we could imagine that for ourselves.
That is so true, and that's such a good point, because what the reality is that our kids are looking to us to see how life works. And if they see that mom or dad or both are really struggling with anxiety and fear and shame in their lives, and trying to solve for those with behaviors that maybe are not as healthy, they're going to think that they're going to go, oh, well, that must be how I should solve for those things as well. So when we do our own inner healing, we can actually, it's going back to that show, don't tell. We can then show them what it's like to live a life that is more confident and connected and creative and clear and all of those C words. Which, if any of your watchers or listeners come from the Christian faith, you could just go to I think, is it Galatians that has the fruits of the Holy Spirit? And you could read through those. It's the same
It
thing. It's
matches
the
up.
Spirit
Yeah.
of God inside of us that He already embodies all of that. And then when we are partnering with the Spirit inside of us who created us, then we will end up experiencing those things. And then when we offer them to ourselves, then we'll be able to offer them to our kids. And our kids will have so much hope.
So, Natalie, though, what would you say to the woman who is listening who's saying, I really messed it up with my kids? Because I'm just thinking, like, oh no, they probably have tons of exile parts in the back of their bus because of what I've done, what I allowed, what went on, what I haven't been able to make right. Like, what would you say to that woman?
Yeah. Well, I am that woman
Mm.
because I did raise my kids in an environment that was very different. Now, my youngest kids, I was separated when my youngest was 2, and then my divorce was final when he was 4. But so they're being raised quite differently than my older kids are. My oldest is 30. So, what I would say is, first of all, everyone has exiles. Everyone has issues, so you're not different from anyone else. So we have to stop shaming ourselves and going, well, I'm such a failure as a parent. Every parent fails in many, many ways. And even when you do I still fail. There are still times when I'll have an older child, and I'll get triggered by something that they say, or they'll get triggered by something that I say. But here's the beautiful thing: as you're evolving and learning more, and you'll be able to do the repair work more quickly, and you'll be able to disconnect from that shame. That the shame is really what gets us cutting off those relationships with people. When we're feeling shame or they're feeling shame, we just run and hide from other people. Or there's lots of different reactions. We might fight, or we might run and hide, or shut down, or we might even be willing to throw ourselves under the bus just to maintain that
Sure.
relationship, where we're
Yeah.
not where we're throwing away our own healthy boundaries in order to keep that relationship intact and make that other person happy, and we don't need
Yeah.
to do that either. So I would just say, first of all, you're normal if you're feeling that way, but also wherever you're at, even if your kids are all grown and they're out of the nest, when you do this work, I still have relationships with my adult children. Now it's different, and they're not in my life every day, but when we do get together, it's very, very different than it was, say, 10 years ago. Our conversations are completely different. They feel so much more safe to be who they are. And I've got, a couple of my kids are not really sure what they believe about God anymore. If you read my book, many years ago, I used to pace the kitchen floor every morning for 30 to 60 minutes. I was like a diehard praying woman, prayer warrior for my kids, that they would grow up and be mighty for God and,
Yeah.
all the whole 9 yards. I wanted them to be missionaries and pastors and just, changing the world. And now I've got a couple of kids that are, well, more than two. I've got 3 or 4 of them that they're not really sure what they believe about God, but they can have conversations with me knowing that I'm not going to try to, convert them. I'm not going to try to shame them. I'm not going to try to scare them or
Right.
anything.
Yeah.
I can do what I believe God does for each one of us. He holds space for us and loves us and he listens to us. And I take my cues from, when Jesus walked on the earth. How did Jesus interact with people? Was he constantly beating them over the heads and telling them that they had to do certain things or else he was going to, toss them to the wind? No, the Bible says he sat and he listened to
Yeah.
people.
Mhm.
He sat with the people in the bars drinking, and he talked to women, which was, anathema back then. He talked to people who were considered prostitutes. He just had so much love and because he wasn't afraid and he
Yes.
wasn't ashamed. And then
Yes.
he had that to offer to other people. So it's never, ever too late to do this repair work in your own life. Now, that doesn't mean that your older kids are going to respond right away, but we're not doing that repair work so that, for the purpose of controlling them
Right,
anyways.
right. Yeah.
It's not another tactic, like our strategy
Right.
for how can I get my kids back into the fold or how can I,
Mhm.
control my kids and their decisions. In fact, the key really is to let them be the adults that they are. Give them freedom to make their own decisions. And some of my adult kids have made some, decisions that I would not necessarily want for them. But it's been amazing to let them be free and be free to make those choices, and they feel safe. Then when they experience the consequences of some of those choices,
Mhm.
you know who they come to
Yeah.
for help and support? They come to me because they know I'm not gonna be like, "Told you so." I'm gonna be like, "I'm so sorry that happened, and tell me about it, and I care about you, and I'm here to listen." Yeah.
I love that. And something else I've learned from you too is to not deprive our kids of their human experience, right? This is
Exactly,
life.
yes.
Life is hard and life is difficult. And so even for those of us who have younger kids in the house, and it's not trying to protect them of every way they might get hurt and their parts might get damaged along the way or influenced. It's rather like you said that we model it, that we deal with this in our own life and we model it to them. We're safe, and then they can have this experience within the safety of our home and learn some resilience and ability to deal with these things on their own as well.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So, Natalie, I have one more thought before we wind up for today. Do you ever find yourself then using this lens of IFS when you're interacting with others? Perhaps someone is being kind of snarky or difficult to you. Do you ever think to yourself, "Ooh, I might be bumping up against a part that's, for whatever reason, having a challenge with this"? Does that help at all for you to not take things personally when people aren't responding the way you think they should?
It really does, because I can tell we can all tell when we get triggered by something someone says. We
Mhm.
feel this internal, sometimes my heart will even start pounding really hard. This will even happen on social media. Have you ever, like, been reading social media posts and maybe you put something on your Facebook page and someone says something derogatory? Maybe they disagree with you. Anyone who believes that is stupid or, something some version of
Totally.
that, right?
Yes, right.
And you might feel your heart pounding when that happens, whether it's in person or on social media or online. I usually will close my eyes and put my hands on my heart and say, "Okay, I can tell that part of me was triggered by that. Part of me is feeling shame or fear. And I wonder what this is about. Tell me what this is about." And then I just let whatever thoughts come up.
Yeah.
Well, I feel bad. I feel like I was stupid. I shouldn't have put that out there. Now everyone's going to think that I'm dumb. Okay. I don't think you're dumb. I think I can answer that. I try to talk to these parts of myself like they were my children, and they are my family. That's why it's called internal family systems. It's because how David Schwartz discovered this is by working as a therapist with families. And he noticed, as he talked to the kids and the mom and the dad, and there's all these different things going on in that ecosystem. And then he realized each one of those people had that whole ecosystem within themselves. There was
Yeah.
like fighting parts within themselves going
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
So if you think of yourself as like, I've got this little family inside of myself, like one part of myself might be like, well, that person is stupid. I can't believe they put that on my Facebook page.
Yep.
Right. And then another person's going, no, I'm the stupid one. I should never have put that on there. Why did I do that?
Yeah.
Another one is going, well, I was supposed to do that because everyone needs to know that. That is the truth. I will always put truth on my Facebook page and everyone needs to know,
Yeah. Yep.
clapping
Yep.
hands. And and so just to be able to acknowledge and hear all of those parts and go, they all have a reason why they think those things, and they're all valid. So now then I can connect with, so where is God for me? Where is God and where's my core self? Where do I stand on this?
Yeah.
How can I hold love? Because I know that God holds love for all of my little parts
Mhm.
and for the person who put that
Uh-huh.
thing on my Facebook page and all their little parts.
Yep.
So where is love in all? Where does love come in for all the people in this story that's unfolding right now? And how can I connect to that? And it might be different. Sometimes it might mean that I take it off my Facebook page. And because I
Sure.
just don't want to, I just,
Mhm.
it's too hard for people.
Yeah.
It's too hard. If it's too hard for me, it's too hard for them.
Mhm.
Sometimes I might leave it up because I think love wants me to leave it up. And then maybe love wants me to respond in a kind and loving way and say, and acknowledge, I can see where you're coming from. And that's a very valid idea. Maybe that's how love wants to respond. I work with Christian women who are in abusive relationships, either or they maybe are like in an abusive religious environment or abusive church where they're experiencing some abuse going on on an institutional level. Sometimes someone will come onto my page and they will say something derogatory about those kinds of about women,
Mhm.
and or about what I teach.
Yeah.
And then sometimes love is making a correction for what they're saying
Yeah.
for the sake of other women who are reading that
Yes.
and want and needing to know, oh no,
Yeah.
maybe I am a bad woman for, maybe I should go back to the way that I used to think and just like hide and placate and
Mhm.
fawn after all these people in my life.
Yeah.
And I want them to know sometimes we stand up for the
Yes.
truth,
Yeah.
even when other people are trying to manipulate us and shame us and strike fear in our hearts.
Mhm.
Sometimes we need to stand up for the truth.
Yes.
So I try to think, how would God do that in the most loving way possible to speak the truth and set a boundary? The point is there's no set answer or right or wrong answer. It's just wisdom in the moment
Yeah.
and connecting with that wisdom inside of you, the Holy Spirit inside of you,
Mhm.
is such a beautiful thing, and to practice it is such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And also to make mistakes. Sometimes we have parts of us that pretend to be, you know,
Sure.
our core self or
Yeah.
pretend to be the Holy Spirit
Yeah.
inside of us.
Yeah, that's good.
So figuring that out, that's a whole nother topic for another time, but
And
yeah.
Natalie, do you think can we do this work on our own? Can we journal and get to the bottom of this, or do we sometimes need to invite outside help in?
Sometimes I think we do need to invite outside help in, but
Mhm.
but you can do it on your own.
Mhm.
I think certain personality types, like there are certain personality types that are more intuitive and they have more like inner self-awareness. They're the real world to them is inside. And then other people have personality types where the real world is out here and they're not as familiar with their ecosystem on the inside of themselves. I think those types probably would do really well to have like an IFS coach or an IFS therapist help walk you through some of this and help you connect. But for me, I mean reading books on IFS like
Mhm.
Altogether You or like my book is a good show not
Yeah.
tell book.
Yeah.
Um will help you see what's possible.
Mhm.
And then I do think even if you did have a coach or an IFS therapist, waiting in between sessions to do this work, that would be such a waste of all of the fodder that comes up on a daily basis
For
in our
sure.
lives.
Sure.
Our parts are with us
Yeah,
24/7.
yeah.
They're not just showing up when we're in the therapy office. So
Yes.
how do we learn how to talk to ourselves and address ourselves? Oh, one little hack that I always teach people is I like to talk to myself in the mirror because our
Oh,
brain doesn't understand the difference between, just like from a brain science
okay.
standpoint, our brain, when we make connection with other people's eyes, our brain doesn't understand the difference between, reality and fantasy. They just,
Right.
every imagination that we have, our brain thinks that's real.
Yeah.
So when we look in the mirror and we really look into our own eyes and say things, our brain is picking up on, first of all, the tone of voice, the kind of look that we have. Are we looking at ourselves lovingly or are we looking at ourselves disdainfully? Like, what's our facial expression look like? And then the words that we say out loud, now we're hearing them audibly, we're engaging all of our senses. And if we're saying things like there's this one point in my book where I talk about this, where I looked in the mirror one day and I was like, I will always have your back.
Mm,
These people don't have your back, but
yeah.
I promise, Natalie, I am not going to throw you under the bus anymore. I will always have your back. I'm always going to be here to listen and validate your experiences from now on. That was a major turning point in my life. Just making that commitment to myself and doing it in the mirror. And ever since then, I will do that now. When I'm really struggling with something, I will look in the mirror and I will talk to myself and I'll talk to one of those parts, just looking at myself in the mirror. And I think that's a powerful thing we can do. Obviously, we're not going to do that in the therapist's office, but we
Yeah.
can do it in our bathroom
That's
anytime
awesome.
we want to.
Yeah. No, that's such a great tip. Well, Natalie, my goodness, this was so great to visit with you today. We will highly recommend your book, especially if anything Natalie's been talking about has been resonating. If you want to kind of dig into this idea more of IFS, I think I truly found the way you described it and walked through some of your parts and their thoughts was so helpful to just get a better grasp of this. And then we'll also link to the other book, Altogether You, that you mentioned, as well as your podcast and your support community. You have so many great resources. So if you've just felt confused, like you don't have the right tools, you need some more support in this area, we will link down below to everything that you do. So thank you for that. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you're looking for more support, be sure to check out The Minimal Mom on YouTube too. And we'll see you next time.